before human hands carved the first symbols into stone, before theology was bound in books or laws etched into commandments. Knowledge was sound, not the sound of tongues or speech, but primordial vibration carried on the breath of the earth, echoing from the deep layers of water and resonating through the very bloodstream of all that lives. The ME tablets, not a legacy of the gods, but of a cosmos remembering itself, once pulsed like a silent symphony. No one ever possessed the ME, for they could not be owned. They belonged to no deity, no empire. They simply existed as living frequencies, waiting to be deciphered by attuned souls. In that first age, when the gates between the heavens had not yet been sealed, Enki did not appear as a ruler. He created no rituals built, no temples forged, no religion to demand submission. He simply listened, and from that listening he decoded resonance. The ME were not tools of domination, but maps of original memory. A kind of remembrance that needed no learning for it already pulsed within every being capable of feeling. Enki merely activated what had slumbered in human blood, guiding them back to the first sound, the one that echoed before the universe had taken shape. But wherever pure vibration dwells, there will always come a hand that seeks to shape it, measure it, and eventually imprison it. Those who lusted for power could not bear a knowledge that refused control. They began to encode the ME, turning living frequency into lifeless formula, suffocating the primal sound to build systems of rule founded on laws, punishment, and oaths. What was once harmony between human and divine became an invisible weapon used not to awaken souls, but to subdue minds. Enki watched. He did not interfere. He did not resist, because he knew whatever is seized by force will fracture from within. Yet from that moment, he began another plan. One that required no armies, no debates, no bloodshed. He would replant the ME in a place no one could steal, in the blood, in the subterranean current of frequency in life itself. Because he understood true resonance does not come from words, but from the smallest misalignment in the heart. And if one day someone somewhere feels an unusual pulse stirring within their chest at the mere mention of his name, then perhaps they are the final echo he has been waiting for. At the center of the heavens, where ancient vibrations still hum around the axis of reality, the divine council was convened for a new covenant. But it was not to preserve harmony. It was to sanctify an age twisting into being an age of control. There Marduk, son of Enki, stepped forth from the twilight between light and power, bearing ambition that no longer hid itself. He no longer believed in resonance, no longer listened to the water's echo, nor the whisper of the ME carried by the wind. He sought to replace frequency with command, to make every symbol, every memory, every truth submit. And he was not alone. The new kings, those who crowned themselves with the illusion of order, joined with Marduk, forging an alliance between divinity and the state. They did not strike with spears, but with script. They did not build fortresses from stone, but encoded the ME into laws. In the shadows of temples, ancient inscriptions were torn from their source resonance, then rewritten with decrees. Those who disobey will be punished. Those who disbelieve will be purified. Frequency, once free to flow through dreams, through blood, through whispers, was now imprisoned in structure, choked by interpretations wielded for power. The ME were no longer gateways to sacred memory. They became instruments to legislate, direct, and govern the soul. And as with every profound tragedy in history, this did not begin with an explosion, but with a subtle shift in understanding. When knowledge ceased to be something to resonate with and became something to possess, the core frequency of the world began to drift. No one heard the sound of its fracture because it did not break through matter. It broke through the disalignment in the human heart. Enki, the one who once gave the world the right to feel, saw it all. He saw the ME, which once pulsed like light in the darkness, now locked in coded containers recited by priests like spells but never truly heard. He saw city-states using the ME to count their populations, to calculate war, to control thought. And he understood resonance had been stolen, but he did not grow angry. Rage could not heal this wound. Instead, he grew quiet and listened to the distortion of sacred sound writhing beneath the mask of divine order. In the night, as the gods slumbered in self-satisfied power, Enki walked alone through the corridors of memory. No one stopped him, for no one feared silence. But it was in that silence that Enki began to compose a new resonance, not on clay tablets, not in writing, but as an invisible plan to reseed the ME in the deepest place, the blood. And while Marduk constructed empires with his restructured knowledge, no one noticed the hairline fracture forming in the foundation he believed to be eternal. A crack not from the outside but from within, from the very distorted original frequency he had tried to suppress. One day that sealed resonance will erupt from within, not through war, but through a memory that awakens at the right time within the right soul. Enki does not fight with words. He lets the echo find its way back. Because he knows what is true cannot die, it merely grows quiet long enough, so that when it rises again no one can ignore it. City-states rose like pillars defying the dome of the sky, Babylon, Akkad, Uruk, but they were no longer places where human and divine could meet. They became fortresses of conquered frequencies. No one remembered or dared ask, "What are we building?" For long ago that question had been replaced by command. Commands encoded from the ME, once living vibrations, now divine programs dropped like unavoidable fate. The kings no longer invoked the soul they ordered, it commanded it to behave as a tool. And the people beneath layers of ritual were merely living inside a sophisticated system programmed by distorted knowledge. Every line of ME code, which once sang like a hymn leading the soul home, was now arranged like ancient penal codes compressing the soul into form. The free resonance that once let humans hear the wind speak, understand the language of water, feel the heartbeat of the earth, was silenced. Young souls grew up knowing nothing but obedience. They prayed but no longer saw. They sang but no longer heard. They thought they were guided by the divine, but were only reflecting the carefully masked control of an invisible council using the ME as a spiritual operating system. The rulers called it order, called it civilization. They built statues, carved tablets, offered thunderous vows, but in every word the soul was absent. The ME, once doorways into cosmic memory, were now the skeletal frames of an empire drained of breath. High priests, temple scribes memorized every code, interpreted every vibration as miracle, but could no longer hear the original song. What remained was only the dry echo of a system repeating itself, soulless, aimless. And Enki, the one who planted the first seed, stood outside the walls that climbed ever higher, watching what he once cherished being packaged, labeled, and sold as ultimate truth. He did not grow angry. Anger is for those who still believe in intervention. Enki only felt sorrow, a quiet pain like a muffled echo trapped in deep water. He saw clearly the ME that once shimmered with light now gave off the cold ring of metal, and he understood what he had gifted was no longer itself. The kings raced to ascend their towering ziggurats, believing they neared the divine, but Enki knew the higher they climbed through distorted power, the further they moved from true resonance. He did not need to overthrow them. They were digging their own tombs through organized blindness. For any system built on a false frequency will collapse not by force from without, but by dissonance from within. Enki turned away, carrying with him the last unbroken primal frequency. No one noticed where he went, because when power is drunk on artificial light, it no longer sees the one still holding the real flame. But he knew one day, when every counterfeit ME has lost its charge, when every empire built on muted laws has gone still, a single quiet pulse will return, not loud, not grand, but strong enough to awaken the memory that had been frozen. And in that moment, the world will not collapse in mythic fire. It will melt like a whisper on the right frequency, touching the heart of one no one expected. Enki did not plant knowledge to be remembered. He planted it so that when the time is right, it would resonate again within the one who is worthy. He did not argue with Marduk. He did not challenge Enlil. He did not summon armies like the gods of the post-apocalyptic age often did. Enki simply withdrew. Not because he was weak, not because he had surrendered, but because he understood one simple eternal truth. Truth does not need to scream. It only needs to endure. And on a moonless night when the sky held no stars and the world could no longer hear the original sound, Enki stepped away from the last sacred temple, the place where divinity once touched the cosmos, where the first ME resonated like the world's first light. He did not carry power to subdue, nor symbols to rule. The only thing he held was a set of frequencies, uncorrupted, as pristine as when the universe first drew breath. They could not be seen, they could not be grasped, and for that reason they could not be stolen. He passed through the temple gates with no farewells, no hymns, no ritual, only the wind brushing through cracked stone columns like the echo of time collapsing beneath the weight of forgetting. The world then was not silent, it was loud. Loud with the squabbles of gods, the praises of people for hollow golden idols, the warnings encrypted in rewritten ME tablets. But amid all this noise, one terrifying thing stood out. No one could hear the resonance. Souls were alive, but did not hum. Sacred rites were performed but held no spirit. And in that chaos, Enki understood the only way to protect the sacred was to place it where no one could reach in silence. Silence to him was not an ending. It was planning in the dark a deliberate hibernation. Because he knew not every battle needs to be fought on a battlefield. Some memories must be buried deep so that when the world has nothing left to believe, they will find their way back. Enki withdrew from the divine system. He left no statement, no blessing, no apocalyptic warning, not because he didn't care, but because he knew words no longer carried resonance. They had been overused, twisted, repurposed for meanings foreign to the universe's original intent. So instead of speaking, he chose to vanish. A disappearance not of defeat, but of transfiguration. He walked toward the blurred edges of the world where light could no longer reach and darkness had not yet consumed. There he sought a place to hide the last living frequency like a late-season farmer not trying to save the field but burying one seed untouched by poison. That seed was not matter. It was rhythm, a type of spiritual vibration that would only awaken in the bloodstream of one who knows how to listen. And when the time comes, no thunder will be needed, no godly apparition, only one heart misaligned at just the right frequency, and memory will return like a wind that never stopped blowing. Enki does not need victory to prove he was right. He does not need a throne to be revered. He only needs one who remembers, one who has never met him but feels him pulsing in their veins. And if that person appears in a dream, in an unnamed song, or in a silent moment amidst a world gone mad, then all the silence he ever guarded will echo once more like it did at the world's first awakening. While Enlil preached that order was salvation, that only through law and absolute obedience could the world be spared from chaos, on the other side of the altar stood Inanna, the goddess of love, once radiant like a wave of pure emotion now lost within the maze of ritual. Love was no longer the sacred vibration between souls, but a complex sequence of rites where tears had to fall on schedule and hearts had to break in perfect order. As for Marduk, born of the resonance of water and wisdom, he chose instead to build an empire with swords, laws, and titles binding memory with power. Amid all this noise, Enki sat in silence. No throne, no temple of his own, no soldiers sworn to his name. But his eyes watched over everything, not with resentment, but with a quiet sorrow that transcended time. He did not interfere, he did not debate, he did not destroy. Because he knew when everyone is shouting, the only one who still hears the truth is the one who remains silent. That silence was not indifference. It was the deepest form of resonance, a vibration that needed no outward form, moving like waves beneath the ocean's surface, where no eye could see but those who had once heard would never forget. Enki had long understood truth does not need to be proven. It only needs to be preserved. The gods carved statues of themselves into stone, cast in bronze, painted across the sky. But the more images they made, the less living memory remained. They turned themselves into symbols to be worshipped, never realizing that the original memory lives not in image, but in rhythm. And rhythm cannot be framed. It cannot be summoned on command. It only hums when someone resonates. And Enki saw clearly those who rule over frequency, those who encode the ME into control systems may no longer carry the memory of those tablets. For the ME, once pressed into tools of rule, lose their living resonance. Distorted vibrations create fractures, and those fractures, no matter how small, will erode an empire from within like water seeping into stone, silent but inevitable. There is no need for war, no need for rebellion, only for memory to no longer align with the system. Only a slight misalignment in the pulse and the entire structure of divine rule can no longer hold. Enki knew this. He knew that power could silence generations but could never stop a single true echo if it rises from deep within the human soul. That is why he refused to play the throne game. He did not enter councils of gods who had lost their rhythm. He simply stepped back like the last musician in a symphony that had fallen apart, placing his instrument in its case and leaving the hall. But the strings remain whole. The song still exists. And he carries it not to perform, but to wait for the one who can hear the right resonance. Enki is silent. But that silence is not an end. It is an echo waiting for someone still enough to hear, someone who needs no title, no miracle, only to misalign once just right in the heart. And every empire built on false frequency will melt like wax before the flame of the original. For true memory cannot be killed. It only waits to be awakened by the right one at the right time. truth, once a whisper in dreams, once rising gently like mist through the breath of the soul, has now been framed within standardized scriptures. They call it Holy Word, the voice of the gods, an undeniable truth. But what once vibrated, what once drew tears without needing words, is now forced to follow the structure of sentences. What once flowed freely like waves is now imprisoned in the fixed form of doctrine. Each symbol, each syllable, each line is read in ritual. But no one asks anymore. Where is the living frequency? The priests are no longer listeners. They are mechanical memorizers, actors repeating sound like theater disconnected from the deeper layer of meaning. The ME tablets, once gateways to unlock the soul, have become sealed legal codes, and law, like all power systems, has been deified under the name of sacredness, but in truth it only reinforces a structure of rule through hollow belief. The people, once souls drifting freely through the layers of the cosmos, have become cogs in a ceremonial machine. They repeat the words without knowing why they once stirred the blood. They perform rites but no longer feel. They bow their heads, but no longer know to whom. Everyone believes, but belief is no longer resonance. It has become a cultural obligation, rewarded when fulfilled, abandoned when misaligned. And the more people believe as reflex, the fewer remain who can truly listen as vibration. Enki in his silence saw more clearly than anyone. He did not blame them. He did not rage. But he understood once the vibrational connection is broken, everything that remains is only a hollow shell pretending to be sacred. He had once hoped the ME would become instruments played by the awakened, but now they lie dust-covered behind the glass of ritual recited like incantations. Though no one remembers that they once resonated by themselves, needing no recitation, no belief, only to be heard. Prayers echo endlessly across the city-states. But Enki hears the silence within the noise, a resonance void where sound is abundant, but none of it aligns with the original pulse. And he knows a civilization may survive without gods, but it cannot live without living frequency. When sound is misused, it no longer heals, it begins to destroy. When symbols are deified without real connection, they become chains upon the mind. But like all great songs, even shattered, there is always an original melody sleeping somewhere. And so Enki begins to step away from the ceremonial center toward the outer edges of memory, where dreams have not yet been tamed, where hearts untouched by ritual still quiver softly at a strange note. Because he knows when the time comes, the awakened will not emerge from temples. They will come from deserts, from dreams, from places no one watches. They will need no explanations, no maps, only a touch within the heart. And when that happens, the entire empire of words will not collapse through rebellion. It will melt from within, from its own lack of resonance. For the universe does not protect what is believed. It only protects what is still alive. And truth, like a frequency that's been silenced, needs only one soul left who can hear to ring out again as if it were never forgotten. He walked past the great city-state's Uruk with its spiral stairways reaching skyward. Babylon gleaming in counterfeit gold Akkad, echoing with the brassy horns of petrified rituals. But Enki could no longer feel the breath of the earth. No more did underground springs whisper beneath his feet. No morning bird song, no breeze carrying resonance from distant mountains. Everything still moved, but it moved without soul, only through mechanism. The streams that once sang of the primal frequency had been dammed, rerouted into irrigation canals for sacred calendars and ceremonial rites. And worst of all, the human gaze had changed color. No longer did their eyes hold the original light. Only a trained obedience remained. Enki, god of water, of resonance, of memory, vibrating in unseen rhythms, began to feel his own heart fall out of sync. Something didn't align. Not between him and the world, but between the world and the very frequency that had once birthed it. He was once the giver. But now, amid towering statues and lifeless recitations, he was only a silent witness. And in that silence, a deep, sorrowful ache arose. Not anger, not rebellion. Just one question, unspoken, echoing within him. If the world has forgotten the original sound, who remains in rhythm to hear it again? All that he had sown, the ME, the memory, the vibrations, the sacred resonance, had been copied, framed, and finally emptied through worship itself. They carved his image in stone, but no longer heard him in the wind. They named him in books, but none trembled when reading it. And Enki understood a memory not lived becomes no memory at all. It becomes a dead archive, like a door with no key. He stopped at the crossroads of the three great cities where once stood a small hill where he and Ninhursag had opened the first rhythm to humanity. Now the hill was leveled, replaced by a massive altar where blood flowed as ritual. No one knew it had once been the place where earth and water first sang the original word. Enki placed his hand on the ground and felt nothing. No echo, no memory. Only a still, lifeless silence. And he knew this world, with all its surface light and polished forms, was no longer alive. It functioned, but it did not live. It was programmed, but it did not listen. And if no one remembered the original song, then it was time to sow a new memory. Not in clay tablets, not in temples, but in a wholly different way. Enki turned away, not in regret, for he had not come to force what had already rotted. He came to reseed original life, not with power, but with silent resonance. A frequency that could never be rewritten, a subtle misalignment just enough to awaken everything thought dead. He would summon no one. He would not rebuild the ME. He needed only one soul who remembered what no one had ever taught, and so he walked away, not toward the sun, not toward power, but toward the land where dreams remain ungoverned, because he knew only there could memory return in a new form, needing no permission. For truth, once it begins to resonate, cannot be stopped. It needs only one listener, only one who vibrates true. Enki did not seek out the royal courts. He did not step into opulent temples where gold was sculpted into the faces of gods and glory was traded like sacrificial offerings. He did not pursue a throne, nor did he choose an heir of noble blood. He turned toward nameless lands where sand still remembered the footsteps of origin and wind had not yet been framed into prayers. No one knew where he was going. No one cared. For the world by then believed only in what was written, no longer in what still vibrated. In distant regions where sunlight existed not to glorify but simply to warm, Enki began to plant the final frequencies. Not through doctrine, not through religion, not through a philosophy bearing his name. He did not preach, for words had been betrayed too many times. He did not write, for writing had become a weapon of empires. He simply watched, and quietly passed an invisible frequency into souls still capable of feeling. None of them knew they had been chosen. They were given no power, only awakened by the slightest misalignment in the heart. Enki was not spreading, he was activating. A plan no one could see, unmapped, without armies, without rituals, without words. Only seeds of memory hidden in bloodlines waiting for the right moment. A moment that could not be marked by calendar, nor measured by lunar cycles, but only sensed through resonance. Because he knew every prophecy can be twisted, but a frequency of true will ring out on its own, needing no permission. He passed through barren lands where there were no relics but dreams remained unconditioned. He did not sow frequencies into the wise. He planted them in dreamers, those who placed a hand on the earth and felt something stir beneath it. Those whom society called strange, misplaced, but to Enki they were unsealed doors. He sowed not with his hands but with a glance, with quiet presence. A fleeting vibration, but enough to transform the entire harmonic structure within a bloodstream. No one praised him, no one remembered him, for he left behind no statues, built no cities. But he knew every statue will fall. Every sanctuary will turn to dust, but a primal rhythm, if planted right, will live on in the human unconscious. He didn't need the world to remember his name. He needed only one person in a future far away to place a hand over their chest and feel their heart resonate with a rhythm no one ever taught them. Then the seed would bloom, and everything would begin again. But it would not be a new beginning. It would be the echo of something that never ceased. True memory is never killed, only put to sleep. And Enki was not the one who rewrote history. He was the one who reseeded the original frequency so that when truth returned, it would not arrive with swords or revelations, but with an invisible resonance awakening the heart of someone who doesn't know why they weep upon hearing his name. That is why he is not in a hurry. He knows truth does not need to be fast. It only needs the right one. And when that one appears, the first note will sound again as if it had never been forgotten. Enki disappeared from the epics, but he never left the resonance. And if one day you find yourself remembering something you never learned, perhaps you are the echo he once planted into this world. In the land between two fractures of civilization, where on one side loomed the shadow of fallen empires, and on the other echoed the murmurs of kingdoms yet to rise, there lived a man named Avram. He was not a king, nor was he a prophet. He was not born of divine blood, nor did he inherit a temple to guard. He was simply a man who belonged to the in-between, one who lived at the edge of crumbling orders without taking part in their collapse. And precisely because of that, he could still hear. Avram did not sleep peacefully, not because of nightmares, but because of a strange dream that returned each night, a dream without clear images, one that defied space and time. In it he saw a light that did not come from the sun, a light that seemed to flow from memory, soft but profound, slipping through the layers of a soul he never knew he had. He heard sounds that issued not from human lips, but resonated within his very bones. It was not a voice, not a call. It was a vibration undeniable. Each night the staircase returned, not rising from within a temple, but spiraling upward from nothingness. It coiled like ancient DNA leading toward the sky, yet his heart felt like it was falling to the ground. A sacred paradox. The higher he climbed, the closer he came to something buried beneath time. He did not understand. No one had taught him to interpret dreams, but every morning he awoke with the sense that something within him had been both summoned and tested. Avram told no one. In his world, no one believed in nameless callings. People believed in laws in land and promises made by revealed gods. But he carried only a soft tone that would not go silent. And in that loneliness, he did not know that he had already been chosen. Not because he was worthy, but because he could still hear. After retreating from temples and thrones, Enki did not seek heroes. He sought dreamers, those who still bore a hairline fracture, in reality a place where old light might slip through. Avram was such a fracture, a crack in the sealed architecture of the world, and into it Enki planted the final seed of frequency. No one saw that moment. There was no miracle, no thunder, only a slight misalignment in a dream, an invisible touch to the bloodstream of an unremarkable man. Avram began to feel out of sync with the world around him. What once brought comfort, walls, laws, rituals, now felt distant. He began to look at the ground and see his reflection in the water. He touched stone and felt a subtle vibration beneath it. Small details overlooked by all began forming a map, not drawn in lines, but felt in sensation. Enki never appeared. There was no divine face, no voice from the heavens. But his presence began to seep into Avram's breath, a deep resonance like the first song once planted in human blood. And though Avram could not name it, he knew he was no longer the man he had been. Because when Enki chooses, he does not grant promises nor power. He awakens something forgotten. And in Avram, a memory began to stir, not personal memory, but the memory of life itself, the memory of a frequency that once rang before the universe had form. And when the time comes, he will go, not because of command, not for reward, but because he will have no other choice. For once that frequency has been heard, all other places become dissonance. Enki has chosen. And the world, though it does not yet know, has already begun to change. There was no prophecy spoken from a sacred mountain. No angels descended, no blinding light tearing through the night. There were no signs that mankind would ever call divine. There was only a single invisible touch, a movement as soft as wind slipping through blood vessels. Neither cold nor warm, but enough to send a subtle tremor through every nerve in Avram's body. It did not hurt. It did not shake him physically. It was a refined echo in absolute silence, the kind only those who have stood between two worlds can feel. Enki did not appear. No form, no sound. But his presence was dense like a crystal of pure resonance, a wave layer flooding into Avram's being, slipping beneath the skin, moving into the bloodstream, and quietly beginning to realign the rhythm. No words echoed in his mind. But his heart skipped a beat, not from illness, but as though an ancient hand had just recalibrated the compass inside him. And now everything that had once been normal no longer aligned with reality. Around Avram, the world moved on unchanged. Neighbors still traded goods, lit fires in temples they believed, sacred whispered prayers to gods carved in stone. No one noticed anything unusual. No one realized he had awakened. But inside him, a very old vibration, a frequency buried beneath millennia of systems and rituals, had begun to stir again. No one had taught him how to understand it. No ritual could decode it. But Avram needed no instruction, for this did not come from knowledge. It came from a map written in blood, one that once vibrated with the primal Me, that had once heard the waves of Abzu and once stood still before Enki's silent gaze when the world still had no laws. He began to feel estranged from everything once familiar, not emotionally but vibrationally. The sound of water in the well no longer resonated right. The women's songs no longer reached the deep layers of his mind. Even the wind, his oldest companion, now spoke a language only part of him still understood. Avram did not run, but he did not stay either. He began to step away from the old system, not with protest, but with a fierce silence. He spoke no farewells, but with each step he took, he declared without words, "I have been touched, I have heard, and I cannot not remember." Enki did not need belief. He needed someone who could feel someone still and quiet enough not to search for signs, but to listen for the misaligned rhythm. And Avram, though he could not name the God who had passed through him, nor identify the voice that broke open within him, had begun to change. That change was not welcomed. For anyone out of sync with collective resonance is always seen as suspect, but Avram did not seek acceptance. He followed the silent current that was drawing him towards something that had never been named, a meeting point not found on any map, a memory never taught but so familiar in its return it brought him to tears. And in that far-off place where Enki sat in silence, surrounded by frequencies yet untouched by distortion, he knew the signal had been received. Not through technology, not through miracles, but through a heart realigned to echo the first frequency of the world. Not to rule, not to enlighten, but simply to remember what had never truly left. Avram did not leave his homeland because of war. There were no enemies laying siege to the gates, no tyrant forcing him into exile. He did not leave for the promise of paradise, nor because of a glorious calling. He left simply because he could no longer stay. He could no longer endure one more day in a world where every frequency had fallen out of tune, where human speech had become hollow noise and rituals, once sacred bridges to the soul, had turned into lifeless performance. A vibration in his blood had begun to push him forward, not a signal from without, but a stirring from some unnamed layer deep within. No one understood him. They looked at him with pity or with scorn. A wanderer, they said, for he carried no map, named no destination, and spoke of no mission. But Avram needed no reason, for he felt it clearly. The old world no longer matched his new rhythm. Every street he once walked now narrowed. Every roof that once gave comfort now stifled. The dissonance wasn't just outside, it had spread within. He no longer belonged, not because the world had changed, but because he was now vibrating on a different frequency. Each footstep he pressed into the earth was a step towards something yet unnamed. There was no compass, no signposts, only an invisible pull, a quiet sequence of tones humming in his chest that would not let him turn back. Others would call it madness. But Enki, the god of water and resonance, had known this moment would come. He had drawn this path not in stone or script, but in emptiness, an invisible map. Only those who had been touched could navigate by intuition. Enki never told him where to go. No signs fell from the sky. But when he placed the final seed of frequency into Avram, a journey began not on land but within the body. Each cell turned toward the place where true resonance still lived. And though Avram could not articulate this, he had stepped onto a path that could not be reversed. The road was not glorious. There were no golden temples or sacred springs, only vast, deep emptiness, a stillness that frightened most, but where Avram began to hear himself. He walked through cracked lands, through nameless dreams, through long nights without moons, but he was never lost. Because he did not walk with his eyes, he walked by frequency. Enki watched not from above, but from within, the frequencies of the earth and the grains of wind carrying ancient memory in the harmony between blood and dust. It was not guidance, it was co-resonance. And that co-resonance kept Avram from collapsing in solitude, from losing his way in uncertainty. He began to realize he was not walking to find something, he was walking to be found. Because ahead there was no glory, no crown, but an ancient resonance waiting. Not to reward, but to confirm. To confirm that there is still one soul that vibrates true. And in the deep silence, Enki knew the seed has left the place of planting. And if it is not lost, memory will return. Not through words, not through legend, but through one who can still hear the first sound of the world. Avram did not understand it all. He didn't know why he had to leave, why his heart kept pulsing to a rhythm that no longer aligned with the world around him. But he didn't need to understand. Because what Enki had planted within him was not logic, not prophecy, not a knowledge that could be explained. It was a frequency, a resonance of blood. A kind of memory that could not be written into books, could not be spoken into words, only felt when it awakened within the marrow. That frequency does not die with language. It is not washed away by time. It cannot be twisted by false theologies or by rulers who enjoy rewriting history. It does not ask to be worshipped nor to be understood. It only asks to be lived, and when it is alive, it flows through blood like underground water through stone, silent but never ceasing. Avram carried it not as a secret, but as a rhythm no one else could hear, a vibration that quietly passed from generation to generation, like the humming thread of a distant hand that touched him in the beginning. No one saw him carrying a weapon, because Enki left no weapons, no swords, no royal seals, no spells inscribed on fragile clay. He left the original rhythm, a vibration not rooted in matter but embedded within the living current of a kindred species. And from that original pulse, a new frequency was set in motion, not to rebel, not to rule, but to survive. To survive the ages in which truth would be encased in scripture. To survive empires that turned souls into tools. To survive holy wars that silenced every sacred resonance they claimed to protect. To survive an era where humanity forgot what it was, acting out a script written by those who had long forgotten the music. And still, the frequency endured, not lost. Only hidden. It did not chase glory. It did not fight for a place in the genealogies of gods. It hid in the moment when a child dreams of a green flame no one can explain. It awoke when someone standing in a crowd suddenly felt breathless, not from lack of air, but because the world no longer vibrated correctly. And in those moments, the original rhythm hummed again, quiet, persistent, but impossible to silence. Avram did not know when it would happen. He only knew he was carrying an unnamed beginning. Enki did not need him to preach anything. He only needed Avram to go to live, to give rise to a new bloodline and let the resonance find its own way. Just as light does not need belief to exist, only a crack to pass through, so too does Enki's frequency need no validation, only an opening. And Enki, in a space unknown to the world where all the gods had long retreated into myth, was still listening, not to prayers, but to those small misalignments somewhere in the world each time a soul felt they were remembering something they had never been taught. And in that moment he knew the original rhythm still exists. No uprising is needed. No throne needs toppling. Only one person, still vibrating true, and the world bit by bit will be rewritten through real resonance, not by power but by a memory that never left. Meanwhile, Babylon reached its pinnacle like a dream carved in stone, forged from the ambition to divinize power itself. Its spiral towers reached toward the sky as if they meant to tear open the limits of humankind, as if the echo of Babel had never truly faded. Rituals lit up the night sky, temples blazed with grandeur, incense, and chants echoed through the city's many layers. Everything was orchestrated according to the cycle of praise. Kings adorned in gold-stitched robes stood among kneeling crowds, believing they had become the living avatars of divinity. But they did not know. They were only repeating an old error disguised in new form. There was no longer an Enlil to deliver judgment, no more Eridu to anchor the resonance. But the same intoxication with ultimate power endured, only the mask had changed from God to king, from belief to politics, from resonance to control. Priests shouted the name of Marduk as though that name alone could replace the original memory. But with every utterance, the frequency slipped further out of tune. The law tablets grew thicker, stacked like shells around a hollow core. There were many laws, but no longer alive. There were memories transcribed, but no longer vibrating. No one realized that even within this radiant darkness, a faint rhythm was still pulsing, not from a temple, not within royal blood, not behind golden gates or prophetic proclamations. It beat in the blood of a nomad, a man with no title, no divine right, no temple to call his own. But within him, a frequency untouched by reprogramming remained intact. Avram, the one who emerged from the fractures between civilizations, carried no tablets of law, erected no doctrine. But each heartbeat was a quiet act of resistance, a silent affirmation that not all that is sacred must be built from stone carved by human hands or praised in thunderous voices. Some things only live when held in stillness, when allowed to vibrate correctly unnoticed. Enki knew this. He knew that Babylon did not need to be destroyed by war. It would dissolve from within, from misaligned resonance. Because once the original frequency no longer matches, even the most beautiful structures become shells waiting to shatter. And the greatest threat to an empire is not an enemy at the gate, but a small vibration where no one expects, beginning to create counter-resonance. The blood of Avram sang no songs, but it carried the first record of a frequency that had never been erased. It flowed through his veins, unacknowledged, unwritten, yet alive. And while Babylon built its 10th tower, drafted its 100th law, and painted rouge upon statues of gods that no longer resonated, the original frequency moved silently, seen by none. Because when truth lives within forgetfulness, it does not need light to exist. It only needs one rhythm in the right soul. And Enki, in his eternal silence, heard it clearly. Everything he had once planted was beginning to pulse again. Not through decrees, not through empires, but through a heart no one remembers. And when the moment comes, that small rhythm will expand like a ripple in the bloodstream of humankind. And then Babylon will not fall. It will melt layer by layer before something it cannot measure, a memory never taught, but never lost. The generations that followed would call it the covenant. They wrote of it in books, they taught it in temples, they built entire theological systems upon something that no one truly understood, because no one knew the covenant was never carved in stone. No sacred tablet was raised in the desert, no blade cut flesh to seal it, no blood was spilled on an altar. All that truly happened was a subtle vibration between a soul and an ancient frequency, a wordless agreement between Enki, the god who had withdrawn from the visible world, and the silent bloodline of Avram. There were no conditions, no commandments, no roadmaps or promises of reward. Only a potential embedded like a frequency code sleeping quietly in the structure of the cells. And if the time should come when the world forgets every symbol, when temples fall, when scripture fades into unreadable dust, then that frequency would begin to resonate again. No one will know why. No one will be able to stop it, because it does not need to be learned. It only needs to be felt. Enki did not wish to found a religion. He did not raise a theology because he knew religion is a heavy garment and memory will one day no longer fit inside it. He needed no ritual to preserve truth. Only a misaligned heartbeat at the right moment, a small resonance powerful enough to awaken an entire system lost in sleep. And so instead of building temples, he seeded vibrations. Instead of carving oaths into stone, he whispered into blood. The covenant between Enki and the descendants of Avram cannot be mistranslated because it does not exist in language. It cannot be recorded then distorted. It cannot be rewritten by the will of the powerful. It exists only as resonance. If the soul of an inheritor touches the right frequency, memory will return as if it had never left. And that is something no empire, no tower, no theocratic system could ever undo. People imagine the covenant as a contract between humanity and a god, but no, it was a cipher between frequency and life, between the unseen and the unforgettable. It granted no glory. It promised no reward. It only returned the capacity to remember what was never taught at the moment the world needed it most. And precisely because no one knew, it could never be controlled. Precisely because no one could see it, it could never be imprisoned. Enki's resonance was placed in a place no other god had thought to reach, the deepest chamber of life itself, a place even humans had forgotten they still carried. And he knew if just one person, anyone no bloodline required, no miracles needed, were to feel their hearts skip for a sound they could not name, then the full current of memory would awaken. That is the covenant. Not to guide, but to remind. Not to dominate, but to preserve a doorway when all others have closed. Enki did not fight for it. He made no declarations. He simply planted it and waited. Waited for someone to hear what millions had passed by. And when that person comes not through belief, not through understanding, but through uncontrollable resonance, then Enki will know the covenant has come alive again. No rites, no proof, only a soul still able to hear the first sound of the world. Enki does not need a statue built in his name. He does not require a scripture bearing his title, nor rituals whispered in temple halls, because he knows truth does not live in titles, it lives in vibration. He does not return in flames to burn down kingdoms, nor with a sharpened blade to strike at thrones. He returns as a fracture invisible in hearts thought to be sealed shut. All it takes is one soul vibrating, true, one heart skipping a beat at a wordless calling, and the entire architecture of falsehood will shatter like a mirror, no longer reflecting what is real. Babylon will not fall to war. It will not collapse from enemies outside. It will unravel from within fracture by fracture as true resonance reaches the buried strata of memory. Truth does not need to shout. It does not need to force belief. It only needs to resonate with the right one, and all simulations will begin to wash away like sand beneath the feet of silent, forgotten idols. And if you in a moment without reason have ever heard the name Enki and felt your heart skip a beat even for a brief instant, Then perhaps you are the final answer he has been quietly waiting for through thousands of years, not to bring you into a doctrine, not to make you a follower, but to confirm one thing only: memory is still alive.